All right. Thank you. Let's begin.
Okay. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you to Patty and Gloria for letting us postpone for a month. Um, so I've put together um, a combination of video and slideshow to share with you this morning. And I guess my only warning, maybe before we get started, to add to our technical difficulties, is that my internet connection is not brilliant. And occasionally I get a message that says my connection's unstable. And if I see that when I'm talking to you all, I might pause for a second and wait for that to go away. It's a little bit more problematic if I'm showing you a video clip. So I want to start off with a short clip. This is a video that's a little bit less than 3 minutes, and I put this together a few years ago now when I was considering doing a Kickstarter campaign. So this was meant to be an introduction to me and what I do. And with that, let's see. So hopefully everyone can see on their screen. I'm sharing it's an image of a woodpile. Can you see that with a chopping block in the front? Good, okay, well, let me start the video then, and here we go. See you in 3 minutes.
Here's Patty.
My name is Don McIvor, and I am an artist. I work in a variety of media, including photography, music, and writing. Foremost, though, I'm a woodworker, and more specifically, a wood turner. That means I rely heavily on a wood lathe as my primary vehicle for expression. You might think a tool which thins a piece of wood in a circle so it can be carved would be limiting, but really the options are limited only by my imagination and my equipment. And I have a long list of dreams I'd like to achieve with wood and a lathe. I do a variety of work with the lathe. Some of my pieces are practical and intended for everyday use. I'm a firm believer that art should be a part of our everyday lives, and that art can extend to utilitarian items through good design, selection of materials, and attention to detail. I also create pieces that are intended for display, and these pieces are more sculptural and sometimes more abstract. I've been working on a group of pieces lately that I call my petroglyph series. These pieces marry two of my interests I never imagined combining, archaeology and wood turning. With this series, I've used the lathe to create a palette or backdrop for further enhancement. Once the piece is off the lathe, I develop a design based on prehistoric petroglyph panels, using themes primarily from the American Southwest. I use a combination of pyrography, carving, and dyes to evoke a sense of mystery and the excitement of discovery you get from stumbling across one of these ancient scenes. Through my art, I'm trying to bring an experience to people who have not had the opportunity to explore the remarkable landscapes of the desert Southwest, or provide a touchstone for those who have. Okay. So I look at that video and I always laugh a little bit to myself because I don't know if you notice the progression of seasons, but it starts off, lots of snow on the ground in winter, and then by the time that piece is finally finished, it looks like early summer, and that's about right for those petroglyph pieces. They are really tedious and labor intensive. It takes me a long time to get through those. Um, so let's see, I want to switch now to the slideshow. And so I'm going to share a different screen with you. And we'll see if this works. So hopefully now you can see a black and white photo on your screen.
Yes.
Great.
I
Okay.
muted everybody except for you. So if they want to ask you a question, they have to unmute themselves.
Okay.
I just found that works better.
Yeah, that's why everybody's so quiet. So I started out, in terms of my art interest, I started out in photography, and both of my parents were avid photographers, and put a camera in my hand when I was very young. I really don't remember how young, but I have lots of terrible photos that I took when I was probably 5, maybe 4, 6 years old. Um, and this is probably my best candid portrait. I took this when I was 8 years old, and the last good portrait I took. And I've moved on to other subjects since then. Still very interested, very avid photographer. Try to have a camera with me almost anywhere I go. And these days with a cell phone, that's pretty easy to achieve. But I do now a lot more landscape, and when the opportunity arises, wildlife photography. And I think having engaged photography from such an early age, and also stuck with it as long as I have, I think it's helped me. I think it served me by giving me an eye for light and form. And I think that carries through to some of the other things that I do, the other visual art that I do. Um, so,
John, can I ask
yeah,
you a question? I'm wondering,
sure.
are these, what kind of camera are you using for most of these?
So nothing particularly fancy by current technology. I've got a Nikon D7000, which is sort of their mid-range digital camera. So it's a SLR, interchangeable lenses.
Uh-huh. Okay. So you have like a telephoto for this
Yeah,
owl
yeah,
picture. And
yeah,
anybody who has a question, just unmute yourself, but then just mute yourself when you're done. But
yeah,
yeah, nice. Very
yeah,
nice.
yeah. Thank you. Um, so I've tried marketing my photography with limited success. It's just such a competitive arena. But fairly early on, I figured out that if I packaged my photography with writing, that was a very appealing product for editors and for publication. And so I've done a fair amount of publishing in popular outlets. And I've got 2 books to my credit. This is one of my books. And this is the other book that I have out. And as you can tell, birds are a common theme. My formal education is in wildlife ecology, and most of my professional career has been in in natural resources management, one form or another, and I've done a lot with birds. So that's sort of led to a lot of these opportunities. And loop back to photography, but photography is the only art form that I have any college level education in. I did take photography courses in undergraduate. And so this publishing and writing avenue has most recently led to this gig, which is I'm now editor of this national journal called Woodturning Fundamentals, quarterly publication. So but getting back into wood, or heading us into the wood direction, when I was in college and shortly thereafter, I had an opportunity to work with a contractor who built log cabins and post and beam homes. This was in Virginia. And when I tell people that I built log cabins, I think they typically have a very different image than this one. These were pretty high-end homes. And what this fellow did that I was working for is he would find these old structures and tear them down, generally number the logs, and move the structure to a new site and put it back together and build a new home. And sometimes for a place like this that was this big, it was more than one structure that was combined. But I think what was really interesting and informative about this experience was that a lot of times the log cabins were made out of chestnut, and the beams that you see in this image, as well as the flooring, is heart pine, which is longleaf pine. And neither chestnut nor heart pine are available commercially anymore. They're logged out. Or in the case of the chestnut, was essentially driven to extinction by a fungus. So they're not readily available. And it's just really remarkable material to work with, and really gave me a sense of history, and got to see a lot of the tracks of the original craftsmen that built the original homes back in the 1700s. A very interesting connection. More recent work. This is a kitchen remodel. This is the before picture, and this was the after. And also do some little bit of built-in furniture. This was a music case. The two drawers on the bottom of this unit slide out for access to the inputs and controls on the amplifiers. Well, back in, let's see, 2006, I'd spent a year trying to teach myself to turn wood, and probably instilled a lot of bad habits. In 2006, I was able to take a 5-day intensive course on turning with this fellow. And everybody now knows his name is Richard Raffin because it's on his jacket. And he's actually an Australian. Actually, he's British, but he lives in Australia, and is internationally known for his teaching and as well as for his turning. So it was really an experience that got my interest and creative juices flowing in the wood turning arena. So this is now me in my current workshop. The video that I showed you earlier was filmed largely in my old workshop, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And we'll talk a little bit more about this particular piece that's illustrated here. But as I mentioned in that intro video, a lot of what I do is functional pieces. I really do like the idea that my work gets utilized. You know, I do make things that are meant to be for display, meant to sit on a shelf, but I think it's really gratifying for me as well as for a lot of makers to know that the things that they're making are being put to their intended use. So a set of serving bowls. This was from a piece of white birch that Rod Wiegand gave me. And I was, other than the fact that they were very big pieces of wood, I was not particularly impressed until I cut them open and saw this grain figure and was just blown away. There's absolutely gorgeous wood. And one of these pieces, you know, pretty much everything I do is really ultimately intended to go to the gallery and then out to a client or for commission.
but in rare instances, and this was one of them, I couldn't let one of those pieces go. So one of those is our salad bowl now. Another functional line of work that I do are these salt and pepper mills. And this sort of piece is interesting to me. I don't get to do enough of these, but occasionally I get contacted by a client who has a piece of wood that has some particular sentimental value and they want me to create something for them. And those projects are a lot of fun. They have more layers of meaning added to them. This particular piece was a little bit reverse engineering in this situation. I actually made this for my father. That opening photo that I showed you, the black and white one of the mother and child, was taken in Australia when I was 8, thereabouts. And we lived in Australia for 4 years. And I made this turned piece for my dad to be kind of a totem of that experience and that part of our lives. And the wood is, I think it's an Australian timber. I don't want to botch exactly which species it was. And then the green stone inset into the top is a cabochon of rock called chrysoprase. And my dad and I actually dug this specific piece of rock out of the ground and shipped it back to the US when we moved back. And Linda Wick actually cut and polished that stone for me. So it was fun piece to do. Another line that I've done a lot of practical pieces or shaving gear, shaving equipment. And I started this fairly early on, about 2006, 7, 8, somewhere in there. And this was a pretty successful product line for me for a while. When I started this work, I was one of 3 people in the US who was doing these, and had to import my own brush knots from China. And now, well, I wrote an article and published it on how to do this work. So did somebody else. And now all of this, the gear to do this is readily available from any wood turning craft supply place, and the market's flooded and the bottom fell out. So, oh well. This is a particularly nice set, I think I did for a client. This fellow was from Pennsylvania, and he came back to me every year and bought himself a new piece from me for his birthday. But I love the way that the grain lines in this set matches so beautifully. So that's a piece of spalted maple, or was from a piece of spalted maple. So one thing that I will point out, perhaps to my detriment, with all of these examples that I've shown you, there's sort of a derisive remark that goes around among wood turners that everything that we do is round and brown. And the lathe is very good at making things round, and wood is naturally brown. So everything's round and brown. And so at some point, after you master technique and some of the basic forms, I think as a wood turner, you start asking yourself, how can I move beyond round and brown? And what am I going to do for sources of inspiration? And so I'll give you some examples of some of the things that influence me and some of the ways I've tried to move beyond some of the more common forms. This is, so there are a lot of cultural traditions, obviously, around the world, which have evolved very distinct forms for vessels, and typically ceramic vessels, because I think a lot of the the concept for a vessel arose out of the need to cook. So one thing to do is to start looking at perhaps one's own heritage, or more broadly at other cultures and heritages around the world. This piece, more than probably any, speaks to my heritage, which doesn't have a great vessel tradition. But this is a form, this is a bowl that was excavated in Dublin, and it's actually a Viking bowl. So it's about 1,100 years old. I thought that would be sort of an interesting piece. There's actually, this is not the only one. This is one example of Viking vessel, but this was sort of my take on that form and on that concept. So this one's turned from camphor, which I don't think the Vikings had access to. Another place I've looked for inspiration, and I kind of alluded to this in that opening video intro, is Native American forms. And these are just some examples. And obviously the Native American tradition in pottery is ongoing and is quite vibrant. So there's a good 1,500 years of forms to look at and choose from. And so this was a piece I did influenced by a Native American form. And you can see that the exterior of the vessel is textured. So when the Native Americans were making vessels, they did not have wheels. The pots were not thrown on wheels. They were formed by stacking coils and then smoothing out the coils to create the form. And often the exteriors were imprinted either with the textures in the paddle they were using to smooth the form, or sometimes they would use a piece of a woven basket and create imprints. So anyway, that was sort of the influence for the texturing on this piece.
So Don, is that wood?
Yes. Yeah, that is, as I recall, there was a piece of maple. So if you could see the interior of this form, it would be you would see the grain lines of the wood, and you would see, if I'm recalling correctly, that it was maple. You would see a light interior. The exterior that I've treated or altered is, first I did this texturing with a pyrography tool. So I burned the exterior, and then I went back over it with India ink and dyed it black. So that's where that color comes from.
Oh.
3 more vessels influenced by Native American traditions. The leftmost piece is actually a box. So the upper sort of triangular form is the lid, and the influence for that is the Northwest Native hunters. When they would go out kayaking, they had these hats that were woven that they would weave out of cedar bark, and they had that form. So that's where that idea came from. I've done a number of these. These are pieces that are influenced by what are called seed pots. So the Anasazi Pueblo cultures, in order to get their crop seeds through the winter without being eaten by insects, would make these tiny little pots with very, very small openings and fill them with seeds and seal them over. So really kind of beguiling forms. Another series influenced by Native American forms. And what I'd like to point out about these is that they are not round. So if you look at this image, you can see that both the left and the right sides below the neck kind of pouch out a little bit more like a football form. And this is this vessel, if you had the right view on it would be similar. It's distorted in its shape. And you can see that it has got some cracks that I've inlaid with turquoise. So typically, if you're trying to make a functional vessel, this is how you would break down a log. So there is stress in wood from a variety of sources, depending on where and how it grew. But the majority of the stress in wood originates around the heart or the pith of the tree. And so if you cut a log and you leave it out to weather, you very quickly start to notice checks and cracks opening in the end of the log, and they predominantly originate from the pith. And so if you're trying to make a stable functional vessel, the first thing you want to do as soon as you cut a log really is get rid of the pith. So you cut that pith out, and then the log is a bit more stable, as will be the form that you turn from it. But if you intentionally leave that pith in place and incorporate it into the form, and particularly if you turn the form while it's still green, the wood will distort around that pith and create these interesting oblong forms. And so for me, taking advantage of that with some of these Native American pot forms was a way to make them more organic and get them away from that strictly round and brown trap into something a little bit more dynamic. So a little bit more in the Native American tradition. This is a Native American bowl from the Mambrace culture, and they were located down along the Salt River in the Phoenix area, between Phoenix and Tucson, basically, from about 10,000 AD to about 1200 or 1250 AD. Their forms were not particularly remarkable, but what was remarkable about this culture was their decoration of the forms, and a lot of geometric designs and a lot of animals. And these are bighorn sheep that have been stylistically incorporated. So this particular piece, is in a museum. Pieces like this, I think, should be in the museum or in museums, but they do turn up on the private market for sale periodically, in the range of about $40,000 to $50,000 for an intact pot. So no way I was going to own one unless I created it myself. So here's my take on that form, turned from wood. This was a piece of holly. And again, you look at the exterior of this bowl, it looks like a wood bowl. And then I came back in and painted the interior of it. So I mentioned,
sorry to interrupt you. What do you paint it with?
that's just acrylic, just a common acrylic paint.
And then you just put a finish over that.
Yeah, yeah. So a little bit on the petroglyph work. I do take my inspiration for this body of work from existing panels. This is a panel in Canyonlands National Park that I got to visit many years ago. These figures are enormous. They're about 10 and 12 feet tall. So that was a source of inspiration for this piece. I try to be true to the original petroglyphs. I had to compress these a little bit to get everything into this particular form. This is 29 inches in diameter. I know that because it's the biggest thing that the lathe I had at the time would turn. Another panel, this is from 9 Mile Canyon in Utah. And this was my translation to wood turning. And on these pieces, I like to decorate both sides so that there's something on both sides of the form for the viewer to explore and experience. So this is the obverse of that same piece. And this was the petroglyph, which informed that side of the form.
Can you talk about the color, like like that piece that, the bigger one, the 29-inch one?
Yeah. So all of these, all of these are colored with aniline dye. So the process, which was kind of documented, but not really, I didn't really talk about it explicitly in that opening video, but the process is to turn these forms on the lathe, which is about 10% of the work. And then once they come off, the images get carved in, they get burned in after carving, and then the whole thing gets a coat of black ink. And then the black ink gets sanded back. So you see the forms, of course, the petroglyph forms retain that black color because they're recessed, but a little bit of the black ink stays in the wood grain and helps highlight it. And then I come back in with these various aniline dyes, and you can layer those. So in this case, the yellow went on first, and then the red over top of that, and then the exterior rim was done differently in blacks and greens. And you can cut those dyes back. So if I feel like the red is too domineering over the yellow, I can sand lightly and cut back through the red to reveal more of the yellow. So that's where those dyes come from.
That's beautiful.
Don, obviously something
Thank
like
you.
takes many hours. So what would you have? How long would it take you to do a piece like this one?
Yeah, that's a reasonable question, and also a little bit hard to answer in that the carving and burning work in particular is so tedious. I just can't do that much of it in one sitting. So it's a little bit hard for me to total everything up, but I would say there's probably about 24 hours of work in a piece like this. You know, but yeah, I can't do that 3 days straight. It drives me nuts. This is a site, a petroglyph site, or actually a pictograph site over in the Okanagan Valley. This is on private land, and I managed to get access to it on one trip. But there's a number of images painted on the rock there, and I went through and captured these with my camera and brought them back with the idea that I would incorporate them into my work. I didn't realize until I got back and I was actually doing the carving that this image and this image are both depicting birth scenes. And that would be, I have no idea what those sort of paddle things are held up over the person's head, but this is a breech birth. So who knows how to interpret all that, but this is what I did with the images from that particular site. And then one last one in this series. This was actually the piece that I was turning in that initial part of the video I showed you. And I decided to decorate it in horse theme, always popular at the gallery. And this actually combined a couple of different panels. But on the back of the piece, I was up hiking at Falls Creek one day and found this piece of bitterbrush root that was weathered out and lying on the ground. And I thought, well, that looks like a horse. Looks like a child's plaything. And that was actually the genesis for this whole piece. So I turned this sort of recess or grotto in the back of the form and mounted this found horse form in the back of the panel.
Is that pine, Don?
It is. That was a ponderosa pine burl. And um, I turn pine about once a year, which is enough to remind me of why I should never turn it again. It's a pretty miserable experience. It doesn't cut all that well, and you just get sap absolutely everywhere. All over your tools, all over the lathe. It's in my hair, it's on the ceiling. It's just, it's so messy. Smells good though. So some other ideas for getting away strictly from round and brown in the decorative arena. So this is a large platter. This was walnut. I think this piece was about 19 or 20 inches in diameter. And the black rim is the rim. So the very wide, exaggerated rim that I decorated using mostly a chip carving technique. And the form, the curved shape of boundary was actually the side of one of my guitars. So strange way of incorporating that. This piece actually just finished another one of these. This piece is upside down. You're looking at the bottom of a bowl, but the exterior has been chip carved and textured. So, you know, the wood turning is a very tactile experience. Turned forms are very tactile, and always hate displaying my pieces in a case. You know, I really think they need to be held and felt to really be properly experienced. Sometimes incorporate decorative painting. This is a piece that's in the Winthrop Gallery right now. And this is a technique that another turner developed, but he calls it the cloud platter. But these are iridescent paints, and you actually put drops of each color on the rim and then blow them around. You can use a straw to create those effects and move the paint around before it dries.
So when you say iridescent paints, they're just paints that you can kind of see through, or special kind
Yes. Yep. They're translucent, so you can see through them, particularly when they're thin. And by blowing the paint to move it around, you get these different densities of paint, so different degrees of translucence. But yeah, the paint was, I probably bought it from Dick Blick, so it's readily available. And it has color, you can't see this, and it's very strange looking stuff because it's just milky when you apply it. It looks like you're putting drops of milk on there, but it has iridescent tint particles in it. I don't know if they're metallic or what, but that's what gives it the color. And as it dries, that milkiness goes away and then the colors come out.
That is so cool.
It's really fun stuff to work with.
John?
Another series I did of marbled decorated rims. So these are, again, this is a lot of fun to do. You actually mix up a bath of, it's water, but it's a seaweed emulsion to it, which thickens it. And then you can put drops of acrylic paint in it, move the acrylic paint around with a comb to create the marbling effect. And then you just dip the finished form into it, and the paint transfers from the liquid to the wood.
Don?
Yeah.
How do you get the sharp demarcation between the interior of the bowl and the rim there?
Yeah, great question. So you do the painting just before hollowing out the interior form, so that it keeps that line nice and crisp and creates an element of of suspense. You don't want to get a catch and run back across the rim.
Oh yeah.
So this is a more sculptural form, and it was, this is how the log came essentially. So the exterior of the log is essentially the outside of the form of the bowl. The pith or center of the log is at the foot. And so there was this natural pocket of decay or damage, some sort of defect in the log itself. And I just simply took advantage of that in turning, excuse me, in turning this piece and gave it this wonderful jagged in-turned rim. And this is another recent piece. So I took Barry Stromberger's welding class a few years ago and have been dabbling in incorporating metal into my turned pieces. This particular one did not require any welding or metal work in particular on my part. I actually found this old metal flange, cleaned it up, and turned the form to fit the flange. And then the copper is actually a reactive paint. So again, we've got metal, in this case, copper particles that are suspended in an acrylic paint, and you paint it onto wood in this case. And you can then, once the paint dries, you can then patinate the copper with a patinating solution to get that wonderful green patina. So this one, you can see just a peek of the interior in there, and you can see a little bit of the natural wood that I've left in there. Another sculptural form. So this piece is probably close to 3 feet wide and maybe 18 inches tall. And the interior of this form, so if you look behind the fish, you see the wave forms that are facing into each other. And that is the turned element of this piece. So I took a square blank, mounted it on the lathe, turned these concentric circles on the interior, took the form off the lathe and turned it around and remounted it, turned the back side of it with concentric circles that matched the form of the front. So if the form went out in the front, it went in the back. So the parallel lines on both faces. And then I took that form off the lathe and ran it through the table saw, cut it into a bunch of pieces. And at that point, I had a jigsaw that could be rearranged in any fashion that I wanted. So I flipped the turned forms on their side and arranged them side by side in this orientation that you see here. So it's meant to evoke water. It's curly maple, so it's already got some dynamic figure to begin with. And of course, that kind of supports the fish connection as well. This is sort of a more playful piece that I did to people who do vessels, whether they're ceramic or wood, talk about footed bowls. So the bowl sits on a foot, and I took that idea in a different direction. So this is my idea of a footed bowl. So this bowl incorporates these feet and legs that are intended for, I guess you could use them for taxidermy or carved birds.
Are those legs that you purchased?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Another question about this one, Don.
Yeah.
Was that turned green? Because the form seems a little bit, the edge is not even. And
yeah, that's a good question, George, but I don't think I did turn that one green. This is spalted apple, and I think part of what you're seeing is the fact that I did not try to clean up or true the rim. So it probably retains a little bit of natural distortion from drying. So part of what George is alluding to is that typically when you turn a vessel, it's typical to start with a piece of green wood or a piece of wood that's not seasoned and rough turn the form. So you get, very unrefined piece. You can tell it's a vessel, but the walls will be very thick. And you set that piece aside to finish drying. And that speeds the drying process because you've removed a lot of the material that was green and wet. And then it leaves you after, it only will take about 3 months for it to dry instead of 3 years. And then that will leave you with a form that's ready to finish turn. But in that drying process, the vessel form will distort. And so your first step as a turner is to remount the thing, the roughed out form on the lathe, and bring it back into true, bring it back to round. And in this case, I certainly did that with the outside and with the interior, but I did not address the rim. And so it's a little bit rough and a little bit more organic. So this is a piece that Gloria and I collaborated on, and a lot of fun. I love doing these pieces with Gloria. It's just so much fun to see what she comes up with. And, but again, back to this theme of just trying to get away from basic round and brown. How do we incorporate new materials and new thoughts, textures, designs?
Is that are those pine needles?
Gloria?
Yes, pine needles.
Thank you. So I like to think about using the lathe for practical solutions, incorporating it into practical solutions. And this obviously is a bathroom sink basin that I turned. This is about 18 inches in diameter, and just an absolutely stunning piece of walnut root that I actually brought back from Virginia, or actually had my father shipped it back to me from Virginia. And this is part of the same bathroom renovation that the sink is in. And this had been a metal wall vent, probably dated to the 50s or so, had multiple coats of paint on it, was just hideous. And so I thought about, how can I solve this problem with my lathe? And so this is 3 pieces of vertical grain, old growth Douglas fir that were glued together. And then I mounted the piece on the lathe, turned the concentric circles, and then drilled vent holes through to allow passage of heated air. Again, same renovation. And if you look in the top of this image, there's a hole in the wall, gap in the drywall. And this, to affix that with drywall would have meant buying a whole, actually have to buy 2 sheets, I think, of 4x8 drywall in order to patch this one hole. So that probably would have been the far cheaper route, but instead I created this this piece to cover up that hole. So again, Douglas fir mounted on the lathe. The portion that the fish are over was turned on the lathe, and then the surrounding field, the grooves there were actually created using a router. A combination of tools. So about 2 years ago, hard to believe it was that long, I undertook the building of a new shop on our property here. And I've been really enjoying having access to considerably more space. I a little bit more than tripled the amount of workspace that I have. It's heated. The light is fantastic. Got room to work. It's just an incredible space. And it's allowing me to get back into some arenas of woodworking that my previous space was too limited to allow me to really undertake, to really enjoy. So I'm exploring some more furniture making, more cabinetry. This is a set of chair legs and rails and stiles that I turned and am mounting on the underside of what had been a rocking chair. It's now a stay in place chair. This is a piece I did recently, a commission piece. This is actually a box, and the sides are book matched cherry, and the face there, which that beautiful, beautiful grain, is a piece of river birch burl. And that actually came off of our property here. Another recent piece, the photo doesn't quite do it justice, but this is an aspen burl. And I've got two videos, each about 7 minutes long, that will take us through the building of this piece, the turning of this piece. So I'll pause for just a second and see if there's any questions. And if there aren't, we can move into checking out those two videos.
I had a question, Don, about that one piece that you utilized to fill in that defect in your, that one. When you're turning that, it looks like it would be very much out of balance.
Yeah. Yeah. It
being
very much, oh, go ahead.
It is being a thin piece. Does it make it easier? I know some things that I've started to turn that have been out of balance are not thin like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if it was easier that way.
Yeah, it's probably a mixed bag in that because it's fur and it's relatively thin, it's also relatively light. And yeah, it was definitely out of balance, but I think because it did not have that much mass, probably worked to my benefit. And it certainly was something that I had to turn slowly because it was out of balance. And that then, as you know, compromises the quality of the cut, leads you to a lot of sanding. And fur is not very cooperative anyway. So yeah, those were the challenges for sure. Sure.